Welcome to the Listener's Guide. I'm Steve, and if I asked you to name a famous composer, I can guess with reasonable certainty that one of the first people you'd name is Beethoven. If I asked you to tell me what you knew about him, I bet you could say that he was deaf and that he wrote a bunch of great symphonies. But what if I asked you why he was famous? Surely being deaf wasn't enough. The answer turns out to be really complicated and differs depending on who you ask. But I'll try to give you a few of the most common explanations. One of the more pragmatic suggestions is that Beethoven was at the right place at the right time. Beethoven had a promising musical career as a young boy. As a young adult, he became a composition student of Joseph Haydn, one of the most prominent composers of the late 18th century. Haydn was especially known for his symphonies and string quartets, and it's no coincidence that those genres became the ones that Beethoven staked his reputation on, both out of admiration and of spite. And Haydn's name was certainly a foot in the door in Vienna, where Beethoven ended up pursuing a career. Now, early 19th century Vienna was undergoing some major cultural changes, especially in music. Aristocrats, the traditional patrons of composers and orchestras, had to make some budget cuts, and as a result, fewer of them could afford to put on the symphonies. At the same time, the middle class was growing, and they wanted to see symphonies, but ones made for them, not for the aristocrats. Beethoven had few competitors in that field. I'd love to talk about the ones that he did have because I do think they're underrepresented, but I don't have the time, so for now I'll just say look up the works of Eberl, Kromer, Wranitzky, and Eroica because they're pretty great. So Beethoven was both highly skilled and fortunate in his opportunities, and he also played up the growing bourgeois aesthetic in his works. About 10 years into his public composing career, his works took on a noticeably more restless and emotional tone. He even dedicated his Third Symphony to Napoleon, who he viewed as a champion of the people and of democracy. That is, until Napoleon crowned himself emperor, at which point Beethoven scratched the name out of the dedication so hard that he ripped a giant hole in the manuscript. Now this symphony is one of the first of his heroic period, in which his compositions show a long-scale arc of struggle into triumph, a style most typified by his famous Fifth Symphony. This dramatic arc also correlates with his own personal struggles as he lost his hearing, which led to a personal isolation as well as a musical isolation. But his deafness is really difficult for me to deal with personally. On the one hand, it is certainly a high achievement to be able to compose music while hearing less and less of it as the years progress. But I also find that many people still act like his musical skill was almost supernatural rather than the result of decades of refining his craft. This is a man who had been training throughout his youth to be a top-tier musician, who studied with one of the leaders of the field as a young adult, and who then continued composing and performing for almost 20 years before his deafness was too great for him to do anything except write. If anyone knew the craft by then, it was Beethoven. But there was a different narrative in the 19th century. After Beethoven's death, someone discovered an unmailed letter to his family among his possessions. It said that he wanted to commit suicide and that the only thing keeping him going was his music. The letter fed into the narrative of overcoming insurmountable obstacles and into the idea of the downtrodden artist hero producing sublime, all-consuming art. Basically, Beethoven was everybody's 19th century emo fave. And Beethoven's symphonies did have a huge impact on the genre throughout the European continent. For God's sake, the man put a chorus into what is traditionally an instrumental work. That kind of revolutionary thinking, combined with a general lack of other composers working in the genre, meant that any composer who wanted to try his hand at symphonic writing would have to grapple with Beethoven's very long shadow. And then the historians got involved. The 19th century saw the rise of the great man view of history, in which historians would try to string together a nice, clear, linear progression from one leader to the next. In Viennese music, this meant that Haydn gave way to Mozart, Mozart to Beethoven, and Beethoven to... well, that part actually became a huge debate. Who would take up Beethoven's mantle? Wagner? Liszt? Brahms? Schumann? The argument would further cement Beethoven into the center of 19th century German and Austrian musical life. In this view of history, Beethoven took on the image of the sullen artist hero who sulked around and was gruff with everyone around him, yet managed to create great music. Which, if you ask me, is a crock of shit. To sustain this image, you have to ignore a bunch of the music that he actually wrote. Wellington's Victory is a great example. It's a military symphony that's kinda hokey and a little bit too on the nose for the event it's trying to commemorate. I mean, you should definitely listen to it, but if you're familiar with Beethoven and you listen to it for the first time, you'll be a little bit surprised. It's no ode to joy. I actually kinda love it. Anyway, to make a long story short, Beethoven was and is famous because he meant a lot of different but important things to a lot of different but important people. I won't deny that he's also important now, and I genuinely love a lot of his music. That said, I hope this helps people to recognize how necessary it is to pull composers off of their pedestals and recontextualize them, because for me at least, that gives me a deeper understanding of their works and a much greater appreciation of who they actually were. Hi, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please do remember to like and subscribe, or like us on Facebook. Send me your comments, your tweets, your questions, anything. I'm on most social media platforms. And if you really like this channel and you can't get enough of it, I would really appreciate your support on Patreon. We are more than halfway to our first goal, which we will celebrate with a live stream. So if you're interested in supporting us, links in the description. There are all sorts of cool perks. Check it out. And with that, I'll see you next time on The Listener's Guide.